Welcome in to Duval Daily, presented by GenJag.com. I'm Jordan DeLugo. Thanks so much for tuning in here on Sunday, April 9th. Happy Easter to all those who observe. Happy Sunday to all who don't. Happy y'all are here with me. We're talking today about positions I expect the Jaguars to address in the 2023 NFL Draft. And of course, the draft is now less than 3 weeks away. Kicks off on Thursday, April 27th. So we're just going to run through the positions I expect the Jaguars to address and kind of just handle this conversation that way so you can try to start thinking about, okay, where do these positions make sense for the Jaguars to make sense? Where is their value for the team? Where are there guys that fit into the mold of prospects that the Jaguars, Trent Baalke, have shown that they like since being in Jacksonville? So we're going to go ahead and dive into it here. First, though, I'd like to remind you, hit me up on Twitter at Jordan DeLugo. Hit that like and subscribe button if you're here on YouTube. So again, Jaguars, positions I expect them to draft in 2023. I think the big three are pretty clear for me. After that, I think there's a bunch of positions that the Jaguars could address, but not necessarily have to address in this draft. I think they are definitely going to address edge. I think that's the position that they're most concerned with right now. Not because they don't love Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen or have some confidence in like Jordan Smith, Deshaun Dixon, Kayvon Chason even as super depth players, right? But they need their Arden Key. They need their Dawon Smoot. Arden Key signed with Tennessee. Dawon Smoot is dealing with the Achilles, so you're not sure when he's going to be healthy, if he's going to return to Jacksonville. The Jaguars need to replace those snaps. They're definitely expecting a leap in play from Trayvon Walker, and based on what he was doing down the stretch for the Jaguars, I think that's a reasonable expectation. What he was doing down the stretch, plus obviously his unbelievable physical upside. But I still think you need to get your pass rush improved, and one of the best ways to do that is drafting edge players. This is a very deep edge class as well. There's a lot of talented guys at the top, a lot of talented guys throughout this class. So I think the Jaguars are definitely going to go get an edge. If they're going to do it early on, you could be looking at Keion White. He definitely fits the Jaguars mold. Tommy Adebawore is more of a guy who played defensive end, but probably, as you saw at the Senior Bowl, going to play more interior defensive line at the next level, but that would be fine as well because that's the second position I have on this list. I think they're going to get an edge, and I think they're going to get a defensive lineman. You've seen them meeting with and showing interest in a lot of edges and defensive linemen. I think the Jaguars are going to address that defensive front in a big way in this draft, but when it comes to some of these edges that I think that they could go after early on, you definitely look at Myles Murphy, at Keion White. Those guys big time fit the bill in terms of what the Jaguars have shown they like. And Trent Baalke, going back to his days in San Francisco as well. You talk about a guy like Isaiah Foskey. I think he fits that bill as well for the Jaguars. You know, big, physical, athletic guys. That's the type of edge rushers the Jaguars have shown that they've liked. And Trent Baalke, again, going back to San Francisco, Zach Harrison, I think, fits the bill for the Jaguars out of Ohio State. Big physical freak at edge. And if there's going to be maybe a guy that they would potentially kind of put their thresholds to the side, you know, their size and athletic thresholds to the side, I think if Nolan Smith was somehow available for them, they would probably be excited about that because he is an outlier type of prospect. Unbelievably small at the position, but unbelievably athletic at the same time. So I think potentially Nolan Smith, but he would be a little bit of a change from what the Jaguars are typically looking for at edge. I think Derek Hall could make sense. Yaya Diaby, and we're now moving down the draft board a little bit here. Derek Hall probably a second-round pick. Yaya Diaby probably third, maybe day 3 of the draft. He's a guy that has tremendous athleticism and size and length, all the things the Jaguars typically look for. So those are some of the ones that I think make the most sense at edge for the Jaguars when you talk about guys that fit the mold of what they've been looking for Defensive linemen, I think you're looking for guys like Roy Robertson Harris. They don't necessarily have to be as tall as Roy Robertson Harris, but guys that fit that mold, guys that can play that position. I think the Jaguars have shown a ton of interest in them so far. When you talk about pre-draft visits, when you talk about going and watching these guys at their pro days and showing a keen interest. I mean, you've seen Jacqueline Roy from LSU, the Jaguars have worked out. Tyler Lacey from Oklahoma State, the Jaguars have worked out. You've also got Scott Matlock. Yaya Diaby, as I mentioned, has some interior pass rush versatility. So there's a lot of guys that the Jaguars have shown an interest in that have that, and Colby Wooden as well, have that potential to kind of be a base 3-4 defensive end. And then when you get into your nickel packages, they can kind of move around the defensive front, rush from different spots, and just kind of wreak havoc in the backfield. I think the Jaguars are definitely going to be in on someone who can do that. So again, I believe the Jags are coming away from this draft with an edge and a interior defensive lineman, and I just gave away my next one. It's either a corner or nickel. I don't think the Jaguars are going to pigeonhole themselves into saying we have to get a nickel, we have to leave Darius Williams outside. I think they're going to try to find the best corner, whether that be a nickel or an outside corner, at the spot that they feel comfortable drafting them, where they feel that there's value. And this is a deep cornerback class, similar to the edge class. And so when do they draft one? I'm not sure, but I don't think they're going to say it has to be a nickel only type of player. Darius Williams has the versatility to play inside or outside. I think long term, they probably would like to get someone who has more of a Tyson Campbell profile playing outside. It looked like they actually signed Darius Williams to play nickel last year. That was their initial plan. We'll see how they move forward, but for me, I don't think that they're going to just say Darius Williams is our starting outside corner opposite Tyson Campbell and we need a nickel, and that's absolutely what we're going to do. I think they're going to try to find a guy who can play outside if he presents himself and has value to them. And I think there are plenty of prospects that could be of interest at the cornerback spot for the Jaguars. You've seen them meet with a Terrell Smith out of Minnesota who had an unbelievable 2022 season, but had some not so great tape prior to 2022. So you have to try to figure out why that is. And some of these visits that you're seeing, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're more interested in X player that's visiting than X player who's not visiting. It means they want more information on this kid, one way or the other. So there's a lot of guys that they won't have met with formally that they really like. They just feel probably comfortable with where they're at, with their understanding of the person and the prospect that they're getting with some of those guys. Just wanted to clear that up a little bit. When you talk about corner, obviously, if Devon Witherspoon was falling outside of the top 10 somehow, I think he would be a great selection to trade up for. I think he's that type of player. Brian Branch, who's more of that nickel role, he would be a perfect fit for what the Jaguars need, in my opinion, out of Alabama. One of the best nickels you'll ever see, not just from a coverage perspective, but he is one of the best tacklers in this class. Cam Smith, I think, is going to be an outside corner at the next level, but he does have experience playing inside, so you like that. I think he could definitely make sense. He's a big, athletic corner. So is Deonte Banks, maybe the most athletic cornerback we've ever seen enter the draft is Deonte Banks out of Maryland. Joey Porter Jr., if he was somehow available within striking distance for the Jaguars, he has incredible length. DJ Turner, one of the fastest corners you'll ever see out of Michigan. He probably doesn't have the size the Jaguars are going to be looking for at the cornerback position, but he's incredibly athletic, closing speed, a really physical, aggressive corner. I would love to see him in Jacksonville. Emmanuel Forbes, that would be, one of the lightest guys the Jaguars have ever brought in, maybe the lightest guy the Jaguars have ever brought in at the cornerback position. He's only 166 pounds, but he's got length. He's got athleticism and incredible playmaking skills. The most interceptions returned for touchdown in FBS history. Clark Phillips, he played a lot of outside corner for Utah, Devin Lloyd's former teammate. And he projects to probably play more inside due to his size. at the next level, but he compares favorably to Darius Williams. Would the Jaguars want to bring in another guy of that stature? I'm not sure. Tyreek Stevenson is a big physical corner, but I think you want to play him outside. Keely Ringo. Where does Keely Ringo fall in this draft? We'll see. He's got incredible straight line speed, covers the vertical route tree pretty damn well. When it comes to change of direction, you see some issues there. Julius Brents, another freak athlete. He just happens to run a 4.5 40, but one of the biggest, longest, quickest, most athletic corners you'll ever see at the position, just doesn't have necessarily the straight line speed that some teams are going to be looking for, but I don't think he needs it with the rest of his athletic profile. I think he's a stud that should go in the second round. Travius Hodges-Tomlinson, tiny, mighty mouse, right? He's about 5'8", but a really good athlete. The nephew or cousin of LaDainian Tomlinson. He's a great football player. He's just a little small. Cameron Mitchell out of Northwestern, Riley Moss, Darius Rush, Corey Trice, I think Mekhi Blackman, Caillou Blue Kelly. All these guys, I think, have a chance to have interest from the Jaguars. Garrett Williams is a guy who, coming off an ACL out of Syracuse, former teammate of Andre Sisco, of course, he is a really, really feisty player. I think he could definitely play nickel for you. So there's a ton of options for the Jaguars at cornerback, at nickel, whatever they end up doing at that spot. I think there's going to be a lot of guys that make sense for them. And I think they're going to definitely come away from this draft with corner, with edge, with defensive line. They really want to improve their ability to stop opposing passing attacks. A lot of that has to do with pass rush and finishing. A lot of that also has to do with your back end coverage. So I think that's where they feel like they need to address. And the good thing about this class, there's a lot of good pass rushers and a lot of good corners. So it's a good draft to need what the Jaguars actually need. The rest of the positions I think they probably will address, but not necessarily a definite, is tight end. Evan Ingram is on a one-year deal. I think after Evan Ingram on your roster, you have Luke Farrell, who you feel decent about as a blocking tight end who can provide something to you as a receiver. But they just don't have numbers at the tight end position right now, which makes me think they're going to bring in some tight ends. And again, this is another group here, position group, where it's a deep class at tight end. So it's another good position to need going into this draft. I think they probably want to address depth at offensive tackle and interior offensive line, not necessarily for 2023, but down the road, right? Cam Robinson has a really expensive contract. You're eventually going to either have to pay Walker Little. He's going into year 3. He only has a 4-year deal. You're going to have to figure out what you're doing with Walker Little. Tyler Shatley and Ben Barch, they are both on expiring contracts in 2023. Brandon Sheriff is an expensive right guard, an aging right guard. So I think the Jaguars are going to try to fortify for the future to make sure that they don't get into a position in a couple years where they're not very comfortable with what they have entering the season. After that, I think wide receiver would not surprise me if they drafted, because even though they have a really good group of wide receivers like Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Jamal Agnew. They really like young guys like Tim Jones and Kendrick Pryor as well. They have a really good wide receiver group, but do they have a big-bodied possession receiver? I mean, can Calvin Ridley be a possession receiver for you? Yes, he can. I get that. Same thing with Christian Kirk, but I think you want a big athletic guy with super glue on his hands who you feel like can be your Marvin Jones type of player in this offense. And now Marvin Jones wasn't the biggest guy, but he could definitely go up and get it for you, come down with more 50-50 balls. I still think you need that type of player in this offense. I don't really see Zay Jones as that type of guy. And look, they have 3 guys that are going to be on their second contract, right? If you talk about bringing Calvin Ridley back beyond the 2023 season, obviously Christian Kirk has a huge deal for you. Zay Jones is on a big deal for you. So do they want to get cheaper and bring in a wide receiver who they can kind of maybe replace somebody on the roster with down the road so they can get cheaper? I think that's a very, very good possibility. And you talk about some of the wide receivers that fit that bill. I think Cedric Tillman would be fantastic there. I think Xavier Hutchinson, who is a local kid, went to Bartram Trail, I believe, and then went to Iowa State. I think both of those guys would be awesome for the Jaguars. Just really, really reliable hands. I think that's something that the Jaguars wide receiver group could use. I would not be surprised about kicker. I think the Jaguars like Riley Patterson. In fact, I know they do. But I also know that Jaguars special teams coordinator Heath Farwell loves having big legs. Riley Patterson, he's accurate. He's a good young kicker. But I do not believe he has the type of leg where you're feeling comfortable kicking from 55 plus. I think that's something that Heath Farwell would probably like to try to find. So I think they might bring in competition, and that could be via undrafted free agency. But I think that they will bring in some competition to try to see, can we get more power from our kicker? Running back, I think that they'll probably end up drafting. They've shown a lot of interest in some of the running backs so far. I think that this is an incredibly deep running back class. Out of all the positions in this class, I think running back might be the deepest. It is a great running back class. There's going to be guys littered throughout day 3 of the draft that are going to go on to do good things for their teams that draft them. And finally, quarterback would not surprise me, right? I don't know that they will draft a quarterback. They did bring back CJ Beathard, so obviously they like what they have in that room with Trevor and CJ. They like the way CJ handles himself as a backup quarterback, handling those responsibilities. But could they get more talent in that room? I think they could. That leaves us with a few positions I don't really expect the Jaguars to address, right? For me, off-ball linebacker would surprise me a little bit. The Jaguars added 3 high-value guys at the position last offseason, yet you only usually have 2 on the field. Jordan Reed of ESPN did report the Jaguars are expected to use Lloyd more as an edge this year. So if that is true, then off-ball linebacker would surprise me less, because you want to fortify depth there if you're going to use Lloyd in a different type of role. But still, at this point, off-ball linebacker would be a little surprising given just how much they invested in the position last offseason. A pure safety would be somewhat surprising. The Jaguars really like Andre Sisco and Rayshawn Jenkins, and they have good depth behind them that they feel comfortable with. A pure center would be surprising because you brought in Luke Fortner. I think that you're looking for more guys with more versatility than just a pure center. And then punter would be an absolute shock, right? Of course, you're not replacing Logan Cook. Long snapper would be a shock as well, but they don't usually get drafted anyways. So, but the Jags, they love their punter. They love their long snapper. I think they like Riley Patterson, but they would like to probably just find someone who could potentially provide a little bit more power to their kicking team. So that's kind of how I view it when it comes to positions I expect the Jags to draft. Some positions I also would be a little bit surprised about if they did address in this 2023 NFL draft. Hopefully that was a good conversation for y'all to kind of see what I see in terms of how the Jaguars are going to be looking at this roster and looking at this 2023 NFL draft. Really appreciate y'all tuning in. Hope you have a great rest of your Sunday, Duval. Have a good one.